So those of you who are on the church email list would have received an email this past week announcing that the title of this morning's sermon that I would be preaching was going to be Good Religion, Bad Religion. And that I was going to tell you the difference between good religion and bad religion. And you read that, I know, and you thought to yourself, at last. An old guy with a beard is going to clarify that for me. And so you decided, this coming Sunday, I'm not going to be a Sunday morning horizontalist, and I'm not going to spend my morning down the coffee shop with a double espresso, or at the mall, or some other cathedral of credit card consumerism. I'm going to go to MDUUC and be enlightened. And then you come here and you see the order of service and you see that the title of the sermon is Money and Me. And you thought to yourself, what the hey? What's that about? Money in a church where I come to be spiritual? Money is not an appropriate topic to be told to think about on a Sunday morning in church. Well, tell that to Buddha, who gave up his enormous inheritance of wealth and privilege as a prince, gave it all up so that he could pursue his path of spiritual enlightenment unencumbered by his wealth. Tell it to Muhammad, because one of the 5 pillars of Islam, not an option, one of the 5 pillars is that you have to give alms. Tell it to Jesus. Do you know that more than a third of all of Jesus' parables and teachings and illustrations are about your relationship with money and possessions and getting that right? And if you don't get that right, forget the rest. Now, I'm not including in these great spiritual teachers the television charlatans who say, the more money you give to me, the more God will love you and reward you financially. The expression is not money is the root of all evil, it's the love of money that is the root of all evil. So this morning I'm going to invite you to think about your relationship with money and your possessions. Now, all of us have money. Some of us a lot, some of us not so much. Some of us get our pleasure from money by the way we earn it, some by the way we spend it, some by the way we hoard it and count it. Some count their wealth by how much they keep close to themselves, and some count their wealth by how much they give away. Some count their wealth by how much they have, and some count their wealth by how much they are content not to have. So, just for a few moments, think about your own history with money. Were you born to affluence or scarcity? Has your history with money been one of gradual and steady accumulation as you have progressed in your careers, as your house has gained in value? Or have you been more up and down? Have you been had times of wealth and times of scarcity? Times when you felt abundant, and other times when money or the lack of, or perhaps the excess of, has caused you anxiety. Just what's your history with money? Let me tell you briefly mine. I had the great good fortune to be born to lower middle class parents, children of the Depression, and money was scarce. I was the youngest of 5 children, 3 older brothers. I lived in hand-me-downs. We never had family holidays because we couldn't afford it. But two things that my family household had in abundance were laughter and love. I remember my childhood with great appreciation for the start in life that my parents gave me, which had nothing to do with material advantage. And the subliminal message I got from that was that I didn't need things to be happy. Curiously, one of my brothers who had the same experience got a very different subliminal message, which was, no matter how much money I have, it's not going to be enough to protect me from being poor as my parents were. He's a miserable cow. Doesn't matter how much he has, it's not enough. So fast forward and into the 90s, and I was the minister in New Hampshire. And two male friends and I had started a men's group. And we met once a month, about half a dozen of us, and we didn't talk about guy things like fast cars, football and beer. We talked about our careers, but also our relationships, the things deep in our heart. And one thing that I was sharing was my distress because my only sister was in Australia dying of cancer. And one day I got a phone call from one of the other co-founders of this men's group and said, David, I want to ask you to do me a favour. Can we meet for coffee? So, sure. So we met for coffee and he said, David, I do want to ask you to do me a favour. I want you to accept a plane ticket to Australia so you can visit your sister. And I know that your pride will tell you to say no. But my wife and I, all of our married lives, have tithed. We put away 1/10 of our income at the start of each month. We have this pot of money. It's not our money anymore. We give that to whatever cause we feel is fit, and it would be a gift to us if you would accept this, the price of a ticket to Australia, which I could not possibly have afforded. Well, I generously overcame my pride and went to Australia, sadly getting there a week after my sister had died, but at least it meant I was there to conduct her memorial service. I was deeply moved by my friend's generosity. He had mentioned the fact that he tithed in passing in the men's group, and his history with that was that he was the son of an Episcopal priest and tithing was just what he grew up with. If he got $1 in pocket money, he had to give 10 cents of it away, or he didn't get the other 90 cents. So that's what he had grown up with. His wife was the eldest of 11 children from a French-Canadian Catholic family, and very poor, sort of basic working class people. And she was in college down in North Carolina and was on the verge of having to quit college because she just couldn't afford to stay. And then she got a phone call from an older couple in her Catholic congregation who said, can you come around for coffee? And they said, we've heard that you're on the verge of quitting college because you just can't afford to stay. How much money do you need in order to continue your studies? Because however much that is, we're going to pay for you. So having been the beneficiary of this older couple's largesse, she also was deeply committed to the principle of tithing. And my friend Robin had said to me, this is no longer our money, please accept it. So deeply moved both by the gift but by the spirit of what they had taught me, I came back and said to my wife at the time, I need to tithe. Because the other thing that Robin had said was, this is not a loan, this is a gift. We don't want you to pay it back, But if you decide to, pay it forward. So my wife and I was country parson. You might know that we're not exactly overpaid. My wife was doing a small part-time job because we also had 3 young children, and the 2 older of whom were doing music lessons and dance classes, the full catastrophe. And at the end of each month, it was really thrilling. Were we going to end up just in the black this month or in the red? It was always kind of a cliffhanger moment. So there was no way that we could rationally afford to give away 10% of our income. It made no rational sense. But I had felt moved by my friend's example that it wasn't about the head, it was about the heart. And so we started tithing. When I would get my monthly paycheck, whatever the amount was, I'd write a check for 1/10 of that and put it in a separate account. My wife would do the same with her income. And then each month we would decide what were the worthy causes. Some were ongoing and some were more one-off occasional. Some remarkable things happened. First of all, and this is the absolute truth, one of the organisations that we decided we wanted to support was Doctors Without Frontiers. So we set up a monthly debit, direct debit from our bank account, which we continue to this day. 2 months after we started that monthly contribution to Doctors Without Borders, that great organisation won the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm just saying. And the other extraordinary thing that happened was that we didn't notice the money that we no longer had. We weren't suddenly living on peanut butter sandwiches and gruel. My children still had their piano lessons and dance classes. Our life was as full and as rich as ever. And suddenly, miraculously, the universe was a more generous place to us. I remember one particular month when I was anxious about how things would end up at the end of that month. I got a check from the United Kingdom for a significant sum of money from a trust that I had never even heard of, but which in its great wisdom decided I was worthy of its largesse. I don't know, I cannot explain it rationally, but suddenly the universe became a more generous place. But much more importantly, it changed my heart. It used to be when I got a solicitation in the mail or by phone or on the street that I would resent that solicitation because I would almost inevitably say no, and then I would resent the fact that that solicitation had reminded me how cheap I was. How dare you remind me how cheap I am? But knowing that I was tithing meant that I knew when I said no to an organisation that I was not because I was being cheap, but because that particular organisation did not speak to my heart in the way that this did. That I could say no with honour rather than with shame. And it turned around the way I thought about my money. And as someone who tithes, I've never done it without anything that has been important to my life. I've had an incredibly rich and full life, giving away 10% of everything I earn. And the extraordinary thing is that however much money I spend on myself doesn't give me nearly as much pleasure and satisfaction as the money I give away. Because our money is its power. Our money is a great source of power. But that power is locked up when it stays in our wallet. It's power which is released only as we give it to the world, as we share it with others. And it kind of doing the practice of tithing has made me given me a whole different view of what the spirit of generosity means. Now I know, and you do too, that there are people who tell the world how smart they are because they're so wealthy and they haven't given a penny to the common good. How smart and how morally bankrupt. How morally bankrupt. You know the story of Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. The visitations from the two spirits of Christmas. And Scrooge starts off mean-spirited, deeply closed in against the world. But the word Scrooge has come to mean somebody who is that original character. But you also know that Scrooge is transformed when he discovers the joy of generosity, when he discovers the joy of what the world can offer, when he opens his heart to it. So this is not an early annual Canvas sermon. That's in the spring. I'll be back. This is a sermon inviting you to think about what your relationship with your money is. Whether you have a lot or a little, whether it's a source of anxiety or joy. What is your relationship with money, and how can you get right with that relationship in order to get your relationship with your own spirit right? Because every great spiritual teacher says, until you get your relationship with money and possessions right, you cannot be at one with your own spirit. That's not me telling you that. That's Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad and every other great spiritual teacher. How many of you know how to swim? So I know how to swim. Badly, it's not pretty. And the way I learned was that I read a book about the physics of flotation. And, I read the book and I watched the diagram and I learned how to swim by reading about it. And that's how you all learn to swim as well, I'm sure. Or maybe you learned how to swim by getting in the water. Shallow end first, and deeper, and deeper, and deeper. You learned how to swim by swimming. You learn the joy of generosity not by reading about it. You learn and experience the joy of generosity by doing it. There's no other way. Let me tell you a postscript to the story of my friends who opened my heart and mind to tithing. A couple of years ago, I was back in New Hampshire visiting, and I was having coffee with this friend, and I said to him, Robin, I want to thank you again for the gift that you gave me. Not only the money of the price of that plane ticket 20 years ago, but opening my heart to the practice of tithing. That was a true gift. Thank you. And he said, I've got a little story to tell you about that. He said, as you know, Shelley was saved from having to leave college by this older couple who paid her tuition fees. The result of which, she's had a great career, she's earned well, and it was always part of her contribution that some years ago she rang up the local state college in New Hampshire and said to the bursar, I guess, "Do you have a student who is on the verge of having to leave college because they can't afford to stay? Because I'm going to pay that person's tuition." I apologise in advance because I always well up when I tell this story. So Robin said, you know, a month or more ago I got a phone call and it was a guy and he said, "Is Shelley Holbert in?" And I said, "No, she's out." "Okay, I'll call back." And this happened a couple of times. And finally my friend said, "So look, I'm her husband. You know, I'm happy to take a message." And he said, "Well, 20 years ago I was a poor student at Keene State College, on the verge of having to leave because I couldn't afford it. But I stayed at college because your wife paid my tuition. I've had a very good career. I wouldn't have had that career had it not been for your wife. And I want her to know that I'm paying the tuition of another student. Whatever money you spend on a fancy meal at an expensive restaurant, I can guarantee you, you'll feel hungry again the next day. Because whatever you spend on yourself doesn't go very far. Whatever you give to the universe, who knows where that's going to go? Amen.